News and Insiders. I'm Alex Baltziger with the Carolina Journal, and today we've got with us Steve Hayes with the Americans for Fair Taxation. I guess my first question for you, Steve, is who is Steve Hayes and what is Americans for Fair Taxation?
Well, I'm an attorney. I will confess that I started off being a tax attorney. I quit doing that in the late 80s when I became convinced that it was a total travesty to have an income tax the way it was being applied in the United States, and I changed to a different areas of law. But I'm recovering tax attorney is why I introduce myself, because you cannot escape the fact that in any area of life in the United States, the income tax will affect it, often adversely. And so you have to be prepared to deal with that. So no one can ever truly not be doing tax law if you're doing business law. But I avoid it as much as I can.
Can you explain in more detail how the Fair Tax Plan works and maybe how it would address some of the frustrations and complexities in our current tax system?
Well, first of all, what we've got right now is an income payroll tax system that's based upon production. The more you make, the more tax you pay. You invest the money, you pay tax on the investments. So we basically punish the things that we tell our kids they should do: work hard, save money. That's the basic plan we have today. That funds the federal government, along with the estate and gift tax, but those are very minor. And what we're talking about is going to a tax that totally eliminates the income tax and the payroll tax and funds it through a consumption tax, a retail sales tax at the federal level. It's similar to the retail sales tax you have in 45 states in North Carolina, but it's at the federal level. So you get all of your paycheck because you no longer have withholding for payroll taxes or income tax. And then you take the money and you go out, and when you make new retail services purchases, like going and get a haircut, or retail goods, like you go to a department store, you go to Walmart, those are all going to be subject to a federal sales tax. And it's a 23% rate. It's called inclusive. That means for every dollar you spend, 23 cents is going to the tax, 77 cents going to the purchase of the product. Just like in Europe, where the value-added tax is included in the price you pay. What we decided to do, though, was to levy it exclusively, just like the state sales tax. So instead of it being 23%, it's 30% of the price you pay at retail for new retail goods and retail services. And that's really all it is. That's the fair tax. There's one additional part that we put in, which is called a prebate, which allows spending up to the poverty level for a family of four, that's approximately $40,000, to be without any tax. Contrasted with the present system where the $40,000 family earnings is going to pay minimally a payroll tax of 7.65%. Under the fair tax, it's zero. Under the present system, it's 7.65%. And then anything you buy that's new above the poverty level for every family in America is going to be subject to the fair tax.
Can you explain what you're talking about with the bill there? How did that get introduced? I believe it's House Resolution 25 right now.
Yes. John Linder in 1998 introduced the bill. It's been reintroduced every term. And because of the Freedom Caucus and the holding McCarthy's feet to the fire, he had to agree to let it come to a vote. It's not something that many in D.C. want, because they like the idea that the income tax is like their own ATM machine. They can say, we're looking at changing the rules on this industry, and they get flooded with contributions from that industry. And so they don't like to give that up. It's also a lot of control. because they can reward their friends and punish their enemies by changing the way things are treated. And so they don't want to give it up. But the main reason that it's opposed in DC, I'm convinced, is because today, Alex, if you and I were to sit down and try to calculate how much tax you really pay, you would say, well, I have this payroll tax, I have this in income tax. And I'd say, okay, and you'd look at me and go, what do you mean, and? What about the other taxes you pay that are included in the goods and services you buy that you don't see? They're the amount of money that the corporation had to mark up the price to cover all the cost of government from everybody that provided that product to them for the final consumption. That's all going to raise the tax you pay. So when you see a 30% tax on every invoice, you start to realize what the real cost of government is.
Right.
And I think by seeing that, you're then going to have an ability to demand something change. Because not just a few people, but every single person in America is a consumer. Everybody's going to see that every day, in some cases multiple times a day. So you're going to transfer power from the government to the people. Because I get my whole paycheck, I then decide how much tax I pay by how much I spend.
So this sounds like a little bit more of a conservative idea. Now, is this supported by any Democrats in Washington or only Republicans? And if there are only Republican supporters, about how many Republicans are supporting this?
We've
or
had as
what
many as
percentage?
70 co-sponsors. We're at 27 now. We've got a lot of people who are starting to look at it, but it's interesting because we're going to have a vote now. And so people are going to have to say, I want to support this, which incidentally gets rid of the IRS because you don't need those people to collect. You get rid of all the forms. So I'm going to support keeping the present system, which means all of the forms have to be filled out. You have to deal with the IRS. You don't get your whole paycheck. Or I'm going to support a system where you get your whole paycheck, there's no IRS, it's collected by the states, just like they collect the state sales tax. It's simple. You don't spend your weekend before tax time trying to figure out how much tax you owe. You simply pay your tax when you go. And so you've got almost, well, not almost, all of them are Republican. When Nancy Pelosi was Speaker, we had some Democrats who said that they would be stripped of their committee assignments if they supported this bill. But we believe there's going to be a lot of people looking at it very hard. I mean, Bobby Kennedy, Robert Kennedy Jr., I was talking to him before he decided to run about this, and he was very receptive because he believes in empowering people, not government, and not having your life controlled by bureaucrats, because that's what's happening now. It's somebody, oftentimes nameless, who's telling you, Alex, how much money you have to pay in tax. Whereas under the Fair Tax, you're telling them how much you're going to pay by how much you spend.
Have there been any other countries or localities that have implemented something like this where they just only tax consumption?
Well, if you look at some of the biggest economies in the world, Texas and Florida, they don't have an income tax. They rely on a sales tax. You look at Tennessee, rapidly expanding economy. They got rid of their income tax. As far as countries, no. Nobody has put it in the same way. But Europe relies more and more on their consumption tax, a value-added tax, and less on their income tax because it's collectible, much more so than the income tax. And here, you've got a situation where the income tax is being evaded over $1 trillion a year, according to the IRS. And what that means is people who should pay that $1 trillion are not paying it. And the IRS isn't collecting it. And they got these 87,000 new agents. And the Peterson Foundation looked at it and said, at best, they're going to collect of the $10 trillion over the next 10 years, assuming it stays the same, $100 billion. So we're going to go through all this aggravation, all this additional cost to collect 0.1% of what's being evaded.
Right.
It's nuts.
Very interesting. So how much, you're talking about a lot of savings in terms of government costs by not having the IRS,
Right.
by not having all these forms that taxpayers have to fill out. About how much savings would that be? Do you have any idea?
It's different numbers have been brought out, but $500 to $700 billion a year, it's estimated. Now, part of that's allocating the value to your time. In other words, you sitting over here doing these returns, there's a certain value to your time. So it's not all just direct cash, but a huge amount of money is spent trying to comply. And basically, you are the tax collector for the federal government if you're an employer. Every company collects for the federal government, for their employees, and remits it
Right.
to the government.
Well, let's tie this into North Carolina. Who are some of your North Carolina supporters?
Well, Congresswoman Fox is a big one, and we've had others who've retired, and we're expecting to get some more as we go along.
And you'll be attending the convention
Yes, sir.
coming up this weekend.
Going to be
Fantastic.
attending. We're going to be meeting with a lot of different people who are interested. And it's also interesting, I think, because North Carolina is very much aware, from what I've been reading, that the income tax being reduced helps the economy. The fair tax is now up for consideration in Alabama, in Georgia, and in Nebraska as a state level tax, which would get rid of their income tax. It would bring all of their sales tax under one umbrella, treat everything uniformly, and allow a prebate, effectively, a credit for lower income people to make it balanced. So you take a situation that is stifling your economy to some extent when you're competing with states that don't have an income tax, and you make it into an economy that's got the best of everything going for it. Because now you've got a progressive tax system.
And our state legislature has a plan right now to eventually reduce the income tax to 2.5%.
Right.
Now, what do you think about that? Do you like that? Is that a
Well,
good
it's
first
better
step?
it's better than what you would have had with a higher rate, but it's not good compared to zero.
Right.
And that's what you're talking about if you do this. You're talking about, again, the same principles of rewarding production, eliminating the bookkeeping entirely. Concentrate not on trying to game the tax system like a lot of businesses have to, but concentrate on making a better product.
Right.
Wouldn't that be a concept?
Right. Well, Steve, thank you very much for joining us here with the Carolina Journal. This is Steve Hayes with the Americans for Fair Taxation. Thank you very much for joining us today,
Alex,
Steve.
thank you for having me. I've enjoyed it.